I'm sorry if there is bad audio. Okay, let's go. Okay. Though he was the one who agreed to do this job in the first place, there were times Alfred couldn't believe what he was doing, moments he even second-guessed himself, something he had never ever done before in his life. He couldn't understand how things had come to this despite having lived it, and he had been the one to agree to it, yes. He had to remind himself of that as he stepped out of his room to start his day, wearing a Philly maid's uniform, stockings, heels, and the most adorable headpiece with ribbons. Well, personally, he didn't think it was very adorable, since he was the one who had to wear it, but that was neither here nor there. But really, the rewards and perks weren't so bad. He could have been doing a whole lot worse. His second-guessing and doubts were in regard to his sense of fashion lately, and nothing else. This was because, despite his ridiculous excuse for a uniform, everything else about the job he liked quite a bit, particularly his handsome, though slightly neurotic employer, Arthur Kirkland, the man who had moved to New York all the way from London for his company and had hired him for a poorly written class feeds ad. That Alfred never thought anyone would consider. He could be a real pill, but Alfred found it kind of attractive sometimes, which was interesting considering Arthur had called Alfred much the same thing. A pill, mind you, but also attractive. And he seemed to like him just as much. Life was funny sometimes. He sighed as he half wobbled down the long hallway and toward the staircase, still a little tired and not quite steady on his feet yet. He still needed to prepare breakfast and collect the morning newspaper for his master, who had asked him to wake him a little later that morning instead of his usual 6 a.m. routine, even on weekends. Arthur had changed his routine in lieu of taking a rare day off, and Alfred hadn't minded at all, as he'd been able to sleep in for once. He collected the paper from the front steps, pleased that no one was walking about outside, though it wasn't as though anyone would see him anyway with what the massive yard and the giant gates. They'd more than likely need a pair of binoculars. Taking the paper inside, he went into the kitchen, pondering briefly over what to prepare. Arthur liked basically the same thing every morning: 2 poached eggs, a fresh scone with only a bit of jam or clotted cream, and a cup of Earl Grey. No more, no less was required. Oh, gosh. Though there were a few times Alfred had thought to sneak a piece of bacon on his plate just to give it a bit more color. Today he decided to be adventurous and surprise him, since today was so different anyway, so he made an easy classic: pancakes. Alfred was no 5-star chef, but he could certainly hold his own in the kitchen, and he perfected the art of pancakes from a young age, having grown up with a younger brother who couldn't live without them. He even went through the trouble of making them small enough that Arthur couldn't accuse him of trying to fatten him up or anything ridiculous. He avoided making them in hilarious shapes, tempting though it was. Most likely the humor would be lost on Arthur upon first waking up. Placing everything on a tray, along with a piping hot cup of tea that Alfred had to wrinkle his nose up at, he knocked 3 times on the door before pushing it his way in carefully. "Good morning, Artie. I bought your breakfast," he chirped into the small dim room. There came a slight groan from the bed, but Alfred ignored it, whistling as he made his way over to the windows and threw open the curtains. Sunshine and the meticulously well kept and clean Kirkland estate greeted him in all his vast beauty, the best of all being a lush rose garden just beneath the window. He turned around, watching as Arthur sat up with another muttered noise that could have been acknowledgement or protest, but it didn't really matter. Alfred carried the tray over to the large king-size bed, but thanks to his stupid shoes, he neatly dumped it all over the half-awake man's lap. Luckily, he caught himself and managed to set it down as neatly as possible. Only a single drop of the tea managed to make it over the rim, and the younger man deftly swiped it up away with the thumb. Oh my god. Before Arthur's eyes adjusted, he lifted out to his mouth reflexively just as the other looked at him, green eyes blinking through blonde lashes as he stared at Alfred's mouth. "What time is it?" he asked flatly. Alfred glanced at his wrist, remembering he no longer wore a watch, in favor of lacy arm braces to complement his ridiculous outfit. He glanced over the ornate clock sitting on the nightstand. "Oh, 9:30, just like you asked." Alfred gestured to the great tray of food. "Breakfast for ya. I made pancakes today." Arthur stared at them back up at him. So much butter and sugar at this hour in the morning. The young man frowned a bit. Only Arthur would have something against pancakes, and after he worked so hard to prepare them. "They're legitimate breakfast food, dude." At Arthur's rather formidable, even so early glare, he corrected us with his night sticker. "Sir, they're real good, I promise." Arthur just gave him another look that didn't invoke confidence in his cooking abilities, so Alfred just poured a bit and folded his arms, watching him right back until his employer sighed and picked up his fork. He delicately cut out a little triangle with more coordination than Alfred expected of him after just waking up. When it was very rare that Arthur did anything without the utmost preciseness. He dipped the edge of it sparingly in a dollop of syrup at the edge of his plate before lifting it up to his lips. Alfred leaned forward unconsciously. Slowly he placed it in his mouth, chewed once, twice, 3 times, swallowed. Alfred knew he looked uncharacteristically hopeful, but he couldn't help himself. Well, Arthur responded by running his tongue sensually over the prongs of the fork, causing his servant to swallow audibly. It could be worse. Hunching over, Alfred sighed exaggeratedly. Babette sat back as Arthur cut out another little piece and began to eat. That was really just his master's way, pretending not to like something just for the hell of it. Alfred knew it had to taste like heaven in comparison to most things the former English patriot had tasted, but especially things that he had made himself before hiring Alfred. The man couldn't cook to save his life. He had hemmed and hawed the first few weeks of Alfred being there to cook for him, but Alfred knew if he really hated it, he would have hired a separate cook. Lord knew he had the money. By the time he had finished and was halfway through savoring his first cup of tea for the day, Alfred felt a bit restless. But that was also normal, considering he wasn't allowed to leave the room till Arthur was finished with breakfast, unless he was ordered to, which was almost never. Alfred squirmed a bit in his seat next to Arthur's legs as he waited for the orders he knew were coming. Arthur continued to look composed and calm, as if enjoying the morning and haze of wakefulness finally settling over him, but Alfred knew better. Finally, the man set his utensil down and dabbed primly at the corners of his mouth with a napkin before placing it onto his empty plate, a sign that he was finished. Alfred took the tray and placed it on a nearby table, his movements slow as he heard the brief rustle of sheets and Arthur clear his throat. "Come here, love." Alfred took a deep breath and turned back around, his big hands reflexively twisting together, a nervous habit he had at times, particularly when faced with the wolfish store of expression Arthur wore around him quite often. He walked over, the heels on his feet nearly causing him to topple over yet again, which would be horribly embarrassing, and there'd be no way to salvage his pride after something like that. Before his knees met the bed, Arthur was reaching up, sliding his long arms about Alfred's waist and pulling him down into his lap, right where the breakfast tray had been moments before. "I take it breakfast was okay, then?" Alfred asked, smiling a bit and feeling kind of silly as his cheeks started to flush. Arthur had his hands on his thighs as he stared at him. "Quite. You did very well," Arthur responded, almost as an Alfred thought, as he leaned forward, nose brushing along Alfred's neck and the silk ribbon that pressed against his Adam's apple. Uncomfortably when he swallowed. His heart was fluttering wildly in his chest, as it was wont to do during these times. What a typo. Okay, it's only gonna get worse from here, so I had to close my door. Arthur turned his face towards him, pressing their lips together in a soft but deep kiss, his tongue tracing the seam of Alfred's lips until he opened for him with a soft noise. His master tasted like syrup bitter tea that had steeped just a little too long in a bit of morning mouth, but it was never as bad as he expected it to be, and the syrup helped quite a bit. He couldn't help the way he licked his own lips when Arthur pulled back first, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth as he watched Alfred do so. "And how's my adorable little maid today, he asked, making Alfred's blush worsen. He wasn't sure if it was from the flattery or, admittedly, feigned anger. "You're not little, or adorable. I wish you wouldn't say that," the maid complained, looking a bit huffy, which naturally did not help his cause, not that he was really trying to fight anything. "Quite right. You're certainly not little by any means. Oh, no." Arthur oh so ceremoniously agreed, still petting Alfred's thigh, "but I rather like your size, and I'm sorry, dear, if you were any more adorable. I'm afraid you'd be in danger of me eating you up." I'm gonna cry. Oh, and he'd heard that one before, and Arthur had a way of eating him up and did so often, so he didn't know why he bothered to say such a thing. And his size, his master made it known, almost every time they did this, that he liked Alfred just the way he was. It was shameful the way that Alfred looked forward to hearing it again and again, so he pretended to be annoyed and insulted, as that was the role he was meant to play, and Arthur seemed to enjoy trying to convince him otherwise. It was all part of the game between them, a game with unwritten rules. "What would you have me call you, then, puppet?" Arthur continued, fingertips skimming over the frilled edges of the skirt. Alfred pretended to think about it. "I'm your big, manly hero?" he said after a moment, which earned him a flat look. He just grinned, even as he shifted in Arthur's lap, careful not to let the shoes catch in the sheets as he moved, straddling the other man with one leg on either side of him. It doesn't have quite the same ring to it, but I'll let you have it. In your dreams," his master murmured, pleased to have him in the position he was. Alfred was easy to get in his lap. It was never a surprise, but they were moving quickly already. He realized as he felt one of hands a little slip up the back of his thigh. He didn't want to play around too much. "You're too kind, sir," he finally replied with only a slight hitch in his breath as he felt that hand glide over the curve of his of his buttocks, and he portrayed nothing in his expression, his fingers twisted and curled around the ribbon-thong panties as he was sporting underneath. However, when that hand moved to the front to trace the half-hard bulge that was the half-hard bulge that was his cock with the finger, he bit his lip quietly as Arthur looked up into his face with one of his impressive eyebrows raised and his lips curved in amusement. "My, eager today, are we?" He just asked just how Alfred knew he would. "I haven't even gotten you out of your clothes." Alfred shrugged slightly, looking away. He knew he'd never get any awards for being a very obedient servant, but Arthur sure seemed to like him just as he was. This was proved time and time again, even when anyone else would simply have ordered him to answer or demanded more from him, but not Arthur. No, Arthur just smiled more, less amused and more charmed than anything, making Alfred's heart continue to do that irritating fluttering that made him a little sick, but not necessarily so bad. He didn't want to think about it anymore, so he leaned close, slightly asking for another kiss. His request was granted, and the moment he felt his master's lips against his again, he made a soft noise of contentment and rolled his lips a little into the hand still playing beneath his skirt. The time they broke apart again, Arthur was sporting his own little prize beneath his silk pajama bottoms, and Alfred was already reaching back to unclasp the ridiculous uniform. He didn't look back at Arthur, though he knew the other man was staring at him heatedly as he managed to slip it off one shoulder before sliding it down and attended the until it bunched at his hips. Arthur took that moment to idly trail his fingers over Alfred's pectorals, making the young man shudder. He let him for a minute before tugging at the outfit again, and Arthur pulled back to let him finish. Sawing through his nose, he realized you have to get off the bed if you want to get this off in a decent amount of time. Carefully, still very aware of the precarious footwear on his feet, he stood up and let the outfit fall down to the floor. He stepped out of it and kicked it somewhat haphazardly to the side, now only dressed in the little maid cap, braces, thong, and white high stockings. This fanfic is hell. Okay. The heels were shiny Mary Jane style pumps that made him even taller than he already was. Okay, I'm done. No, I'm not. I'm messing with you guys. I'm crying. He looked back at Arthur, who looked ready to pounce. Alfred just smiled secretively, and crawled back onto the bed over him, leaving enough space between them for Arthur to sit up even further before Alfred settled between his legs. When his master simply ran his fingers through his hair, Alfred dipped his head, nosing at his covered erection tentatively at first before slipping them, along with his underwear, down halfway and pressing his warm mouth over his cock. Alfred never asked him for sex, at least not outright. It hadn't even been a part of the job description. The first time they met, when Alfred had come in for the interview that lasted about half an hour, he'd been told that he would be assessed around the mansion in whatever way Arthur deemed fit. It amounted to the typical duties one would expect from a housekeeper, his only housekeeper, as the only other person who had worked at the manor was a groundskeeper, who didn't even live there, and only worked every other day. The wardrobe requirements came not long after, before the contract was presented to him, and at once Alfred was shown to what would be his room and found his closet full of things he couldn't imagine any woman wearing in good conscience, let alone a 6-foot-tall young man with the physique of a football quarterback like he once was. Honestly, he should have been suspicious when the application had asked for his detailed measurements and shoe size. It begged the question as to where in the world Arthur managed to get such a collection of ridiculous clothes, and on such short notice. But he found out later that apparently he had a mysterious Japanese business associate who owned some weird online costume company that Alfred had never bothered to investigate further. It also made him wonder what Arthur had planned to do with the clothing should Alfred have rejected his offer, as that had been a very real possibility. Indeed, it hadn't gone over well at first, but oh, could Mr. Kirkland be convincing, but with his stiff-upper-lipped attitude and the commanding way he spoke without having to give an order. Alfred had been, quite frankly, mesmerized right away. It also helped that Arthur had also agreed to pay Alfred double of what he'd told him during the interview if he agreed to the terms, i.e. the various inappropriate costumes that left nothing to the imagination. And Alfred had far too many bills from 4 seemingly worthless years in university. He agreed after some serious self-examination that hadn't helped at all, but he eventually said what the hell, and soon found himself a part of the world that he could never have imagined, one in which he was working for a man who seemed to have everything but wanted him. Alfred learned right away that Arthur was probably the strangest person he'd ever met. He could be dashing and awkward all at once, and he seemed to be emotionally lacking and constipated when it came to things like romance. He had friends and acquaintances, but his sex life seemed to be lacking. God only knew why, as it wasn't like Arthur was unattractive by any means, and he was pretty fucking fantastic in the bedroom. So, of course, his only option was to hire some young bloke off the street to do housework, which was sort of a cover for his desire of finding a bedmate. One he could share his home with, and ask him to be scantily clad while doing so. Oh my god, my neck hurts. Again, the sex hadn't been part of it right away. Arthur liked to look. The touching started once he realized that Alfred was rather attached to him too, and it was extremely obvious that he was. Suddenly it became consensual. Alfred has always been a bit of a shameless flirt whenever he wanted to get something out of a situation. In this particular case, he simply did because he wanted to. He teased Arthur, indulged him by wearing the stupid dresses, because it wasn't like anyone else ever saw him, and if it got the other man to look at him like he did, then that was fine. He complimented him, did everything he asked, except for the times he didn't, and made sure to play hard to get because Arthur miraculously liked that too, even though he'd fuss and probably be adorably irritated. Because he wanted Arthur, not right away, of course, but his only reaction from the beginning being simply flattered. But after the first few months he was certain of his feelings. It was then that the proverbial floodgates opened, because once Arthur got even the smallest taste of what he desired, he could be insatiable, and Alfred didn't think he could be blamed for giving in. It would have been one thing to be working for some creepy old geezer who liked young boys in dresses, who had forced him to do these things, but Alfred had known what he had signed up for, and it was all for the adorably awkward, conscientious and kind Arthur, who was 5 years older than him, a handsome 29, but by no means a geezer, even if he did like to smoke cigars and wear sweater vests and read about the stock market. He was way too kinky and horny all the time to be a real old man anyway, Alfred always thought. Even now he's bobbed his head up and down in Arthur's lap, and Arthur just smiled. No, smirked, definitely smirked, down at him, adjusting the little cap on top of the younger man's head to keep the perfect aesthetic. Alfred looked back at him through his lashes as he sucked, his tongue swirling over the head of his cock as he made a soft groan in the back of his throat. What had started as just Arthur touching him inappropriately while he dusted furniture and some lewd staring became this, Alfred making himself available whenever Arthur asked, or didn't ask, as again he never had to. He read the visual cues and was never wrong. The suction of his mouth grew stronger the more Arthur responded. The older man was bucking his hips ever so slightly, not enough to choke him. It was too early to be so brash, so Alfred simply took it upon himself to do more, relaxing his throat and inhaling more of him, swallowing around the salty organ in his mouth with some difficulty. He nearly gagged and would have thought it all a stupid idea were it not for the look of absolute bliss on his master's face. So he carried on, moving his lips and sucking faster and faster until he felt those slim hips stiffen. Okay, now I'm really done. My throat hurts. I'm sick. If you want a part 2, please say no. I don't want to do this again.